The Siege of the Mountain. This is the name the Sturgians gave to this epic tale I'm about to tell you, thanks to Gorgi's rallying call and the defeat of the Batanian lord Mormaer Aeron in a pitched battle. Gorgi, however, was wounded and would not be able to fight for some time. Despite Gorgi's injury, the siege will continue. Sturgia came with strength to one of the largest Batanian cities, the city of Dunaglannys, the mountain. The city walls were old, but don't mistake their age for weakness. They were as wide as they are tall, war-torn, yes, but they were fit for purpose. This attack will not be easy and will take time. Neither side would give in without a fight. After setting up camp, the siege could begin. Gorgi made his way past the picket lines and moved up with the skirmishers to get a better look at the defences, being careful not to fall victim to a rogue arrow. Surely enough, the city walls were well manned and well stocked with supplies. The notorious bowmen of Batania were knocking their arrows and liberally letting them loose at the invaders. They had fully manned catapults and mounted ballistas, each projectile causing devastating damage that would pierce several men or turn them into mulch. The Sturgians were moving up, like every siege before, the battering ram on course for their gate, along with a siege tower to attack the left wall. The arrow fire was unrelenting and the casualties of Sturgia were already adding up. The die rolled was a low score. The battering ram was destroyed. A direct hit from one of the catapults caused it to fall to pieces. This didn't stop the advance. The Sturgians unsheathed their axes and began the slow work of hacking down the gates. The siege tower had engaged. The slow progress on the gate allowed the Batanians to focus their efforts on the walls. This wasn't going as planned. Gorgi was badly wounded and could only watch from afar as his fellow countrymen fell one by one to the merciless defenders on the walls or fall victim to a well-aimed arrow shaft. The gate progress was non-existent. Even if they got one gate down, there was surely another interior. Gorgi had no choice. Despite his injury, he made his way up to the front line so they could abandon this first assault as soon as possible. He thought he'd lose less men by ordering the retreat himself. Just before his forces began climbing the ladders, he made his way to the front to call retreat, risky and foolish, but he needed to lose as little lives as possible in this failed attempt, if they were to attack again. It was over a week before they attempted a second assault. They had been too eager to attack the first time. This time, they had bombarded their walls for longer with their own trebuchets, recently constructed. Devastating field artillery, which took long to construct, but they could fire large boulders at a great range upon their enemies. Gorgi himself oversaw the bombardment, which went on day and night for some time. Only when he was satisfied would the assault begin again. Trebuchets had done their jobs. The Sturgian skirmishers could get closer to the walls, as the defenders were less inclined to stick their heads out if flying boulders were crashing their way. This allowed for a more even exchange of arrow fire from the Sturgians. Gorgi had also changed the position of attack for the siege tower. He decided the right-hand side wall would be more favourable. He also acknowledged that the battering ram was making its way to the gate much easier, with less enemy artillery firing from the walls. The casualties were still high. The Battanians were fighting on. Gorgi roamed the battlefield. When the gate was down, he would move up with the men to encourage the assault. However, he was still too weak to fight hand to hand. The gate is down. The easy part is done, Gorgi thought. He made his way inside and hacked at the gate to encourage his men, but then he would move back to allow for the sergeants of the army to take on over. The wary Sturgians charged into the Battanian defenders, held up inside the courtyard of the castle of Dunaglannys, the mountain. Quickly it became obvious this would not be over soon. First assault, a forlorn hope, was never expected to succeed. They rarely did. It was time for the second wave. The first wave had pushed back the defenders slightly, giving the next wave some room to navigate the courtyard. The second sergeant encouraged his men around the initial conflict to flank them on the right-hand side inside the courtyard. The numbers of the Battanians were astonishing. Many of their soldiers and militia were reserved further back into the city, allowing them to trickle out numbers as they needed to hold the line and push the invaders back. All the more disheartening for the attackers, as every man they killed was replaced with a fresh appetite for a fight. I can't say for certain if this is true, but the second wave sergeant. We heard he dropped his weapon and resorted to using his fists before the end came to him. The third wave began to enter the gates. The battle on the walls was going nowhere. Only capturing the courtyard would secure a victory over the mountain, the city of Dunaglannys. The third sergeant enters the courtyard, but the numerous numbers of the Battanians was too much. They fought on hard, barely making it inside the courtyard. What ground was paid for by blood, it seemed. To be lost again, inch by inch. The assault had failed. The bodies from the previous battles had been cleared. Both factions decided to allow unarmed men to collect their dead. The appetite for war was rescinding. Perhaps both Britannia and Sturgia regretted this war, but the line of no return was crossed far long ago. Only a victory or defeat was to be achieved, no mutual conclusion. It had been several months since the first attack. What morale they had gained from the previous victories had diminished. This was the last attempt. If they failed now, they would surely be pushed back to Sturgian borders, if not further. Gorgi would lose all influence, as this siege had his name on it. The siege had its toll on the enemy also. Less and less archers were harassing the invaders from the walls, and more of the city's mounted weapons had been destroyed. This attack would be the same as the last, with only one difference. Gorgi was finally able to lead from the front. His injury was manageable, he decided. Tempting fate, he ran his way over open ground to help the ram finish off the repaired gate. Rolling the dice again, Gorgi could easily be slain from arrow fire, but as usual, he surrendered himself, his life, to fate. The gate was down. Gorgi slayed 2 defenders with ease. Then he made his way to the gate to pound his weapon down on his enemy's door. With his allies at his side, the final gate was down once more. Together, the Sturgian men engaged in combat, putting it all on the line. The Britannians were holding, but the fury of the Sturgians was felt right at the back of the Britannian line. The defenders could feel it. The renewed determination of their enemy was coming for them. The Sturgians outside the city were racing to the main gates to add to the crush. They all knew the battle was on a knife's edge. The weight of both factions clashed with weapons in a fight that seemed to never end. During this time there were no longer lords, no longer a class system, fiefs or nobility. Only the animalistic nature of what man could be. Every soldier here forgot who he was before and adopted a new spirit. Creatures with claws they were. Creatures with claws. It had seemed like a lifetime, but the Britannians finally broke their nerves. Slowly, one by one, they started to retreat into the city. The battle was won, paid for in blood, a historic moment of triumph. The mountain had fallen. To end this tale, I will speak not of blood, but of love. It was during the siege Gorgi had become acquainted with a lady of Sturgia, a warrior maiden, Tiana of the family Vezoving. She said to Gorgi, "You are, I heard, a man of the world, as they say. Tell me a bit about your journeys." Gorgi replied, "What can I say? It's a beautiful world, but filled with so much suffering." "I see," she said. "Between your followers, your rivals, and your enemies, You must have met a lot of interesting people. Gorgi replied, most people would put a knife in your back for a few coppers. Have a few friends and keep them close, I guess. She then said, some people say you will go far. Suppose you were to rise to a position of power. What then would you do? Gorgi thought for a moment. I'll make sure those who stuck their necks out for me, who sweated and bled for me, get their due. She smiled and finally said, well, it seems we do have a fair amount in common, Gorgi. They smiled at each other, still covered in dirt and blood from the battle. They say you meet someone when you least expect it. Gorgi least expected to meet Tiana. Their duties would take them separate ways, but that night, they stayed with each other. They would meet again. They would meet again, if fate would have it.